According to the American College of Sports Medicine, approximately 1 in 5 adults experience a mental health condition or concern throughout the course of their lifetime. However, among collegiate athletes, 30% of women and 25% of men experience some sort of anxiety, depression, or stress during the course of their collegiate careers. Meanwhile, according to the National Institute of Health, dancers experience post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, at a much higher rate than the normal population, at a clip of 20.2% versus 7.8% for the rest of the population. Mitchell DeSimone is a certified mental performance consultant and retired professional dancer. He works with NCAA teams, professional performing arts organizations, youth sports organizations, and individual and sub-elite athletes and artists and other elite professionals in a diverse set of domains to discover how best, from a mental, emotional, and psychological standpoint, he can add value to their lives and to ensure they can take full advantage of every aspect of their potential. DeSimone joined me this week to have a wide-ranging and thought-provoking conversation about mental health in both athletics, performing arts, and in life. It's a discussion, regardless of the field of interest which you're in, that we can all get value from. So without further delay, I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. First and foremost, I want to take a moment to welcome you to the program, my friend, and I'm super excited to learn all about how you make the world a better place. Great to see you this morning, and thank you so very much for being here.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me, and I love that intro. I love to hear about how you're making the world a better place. Way to frame it and set it up. I really love that.
Yeah, and I know for you, the way you make the world a better place is you're a certified mental performance consultant and a retired professional dancer. And you were sharing with me that your wife and you run a dance studio. So I'm fascinated how you make a difference in the world with the work that you do.
Yes, there's a lot of work in a lot of different areas, but I think they all kind of align very similarly. So I spent a lot of time trying to help people avoid some of the issues that I came into myself and a lot of my colleagues faced, trying to manage the sort of pressures that came with performing at an elite level, and some of the side effects that can come along with that. So that's sort of what I've been trying to dedicate my last maybe 10 years or so of my life to addressing that space and providing support for individuals, dancers, performing artists, athletes, and even working with some people in business and a couple of military clients as well, managing pressure and making sure that they're doing that in a way that is facilitative of a healthy and successful mindset. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mitchell, tell me, in your opinion, I'm fascinated to know how do you think we can create a roadmap to create great mental spaces to fully take advantage of our potential from a mental performance standpoint?
Yeah. Well, Kevin, I think if I had the answer to that question, I would be a billionaire at this point. But I think the critical piece is to know that there isn't necessarily one path, right? And I think that is why. So when I finished a very short tangent, you'll find out very quickly that I'm the master of tangents. But when I finished my master's degree in performance psychology, and I was kind of hoping to figure that out, right? And what is the path that we all need to take to get to a place where we can find elite performance and create sustainable elite performance, but also have a healthy mindset that is going to have a positive impact on our lives outside of performance. And when I started working there, I sort of realized that maybe that wasn't such a realistic path for me to go down, that it's much more nuanced than that. And so that's why I went back to do my doctorate degree and got involved in all the research that I'm involved in right now. Because I think it's very, very nuanced, and it becomes really important to know self and know what is helpful for you, and to engage with people that are working in the research to be able to figure that individualized approach to it, and what's going to work for you, Kevin, is maybe not what's going to work so well for me, Mitch, um, and I think that's really the critical point of it, is to find that individual path.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Mitchell, selfishly, I want to ask you this question. Before we started recording this morning, I shared with you that I was born with cerebral palsy. And I'm curious because, a whole different definition of mental and physical performance can happen when you have a disability, right? So I'm curious, when you look at the world today, how do you think we can better define the word inclusion for all people, including those with disabilities? And how do you think we can have a better mental health conversation that allows everyone to be equally included in society? I know it's a selfish question, but it's something that I really wanted to ask you. So I wanted your thoughts there as well.
Yeah. Well, it's a selfish question. I think it's an important question, and it might be something that you're curious about, but it's something that's important to so many people. Really, it should be important to everybody, I think. And in some ways, I'm sure it is. Honestly, I think the biggest thing, and the thing that I've been trying to do a lot, is um, sort of to celebrate those differences. I think a lot of times you hear people talking about, and I have a close friend who works in a lot of programs for deaf people, high school individuals with hearing impairment, and trying to help them get jobs. And something that I spoke with her a lot about was finding what makes them powerful and what makes them unique, and their strengths. And that's something that I try to do with all my clients as well, right? Because it's easy to see someone who is maybe a little bit different and to say, okay, well, I'll treat them the same as I would treat anybody else, and maybe try to overlook those differences. And I think really, when you do that, you're cutting out what makes that person so special, right? And looking at you, Kevin, right? That to get to the point where you're at right now, it probably was a lot more work for you than your average individual, right? And that story is something that you should be able to share and be proud of and be celebrated. And what helped you get to that point, and for anyone, not just individuals with a disability, but anyone, right? What makes you unique, and let's celebrate that uniqueness and that individual story. And I think that's a really important piece. I don't know what your thoughts are. I'd love to hear your thoughts, actually.
Yeah, so Mitchell, I'll tell you just a very quick story about the
Yeah.
turning point in my life. So Mitchell, I found it at 9 years old because of the severity of my cerebral palsy. I wouldn't be able to walk without assistance for the duration of my life. And, internally, what happened with me, I found out when I was in a hospital conference room when I had my last surgery for my disability about 25 or 26 years ago, and I had to go back to elementary school the next day. And, I credit my middle school principal. Her name was Dr. Carol Crewley at the time, and she knew that I was going to London the previous day, and I was going to learn that I wouldn't be able to walk for the duration of my life. And so the next day I was called down to the principal's office because she wanted to check on my mental and emotional well-being. And I went through the story of uh, what had happened the previous day. And when I got to her office, she had every one assigned to my file, from teachers to social workers to therapists, and my parents were there, and I had gone through the story of what happened the previous day. And then she stopped me at the end of the story, and she looked at me and she said, "The only limitations on your life are the artificial ones that you place on yourself personally." And, Mitchell, I really think that was the turning point in my life. So I always tell people that life is a precious gift, and we're always given a compass to point in life, and it's up to all of us to point it in the direction that we want to go. So that's kind of the motto that I live my life by, my friend.
I love it. Yes, 100%. I love that story. Thank you for sharing it. And
You're,
you're very true. That's very true. That's really great words of advice to be able to kind of look at that and see, are these limits that I'm going to impose, and is that okay, right? And sure, when we don't set limits, then we open ourselves up for failure. But what's so bad about failing, and being able to go and take that shot and work towards something. And if you're going to continue to work, then you can continue to make progress as long as you're doing it in a well balanced way. So good. Thank you for sharing, Kevin. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and just because you brought it up, I'll follow up with just a follow-up question. Because, Mitchell, I really believe that you can learn from failure too. You don't want to
Mm-hmm.
multiply the levels in which you fail, but I really think you can also learn from failure. Would you agree with that?
I would wholeheartedly agree with that. Yes, some of the most important moments of my life were failing. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Mitchell, I also know that you advise some NCAA teams and performing arts organizations as well. And, Mitchell, with the name, image, and likeness these days, and the pressure to also perform both on and off the field, athletes in particular, and I'm an old sports reporter, so I'm excited to ask you this question. Athletes in particular are put on sort of a pedestal to live up to expectations. And from a mental health perspective, considering name, image, and likeness, the pressure to perform and to live up to an ideology has amplified itself. So I'm fascinated to ask your opinion on the new landscape for NCAA athletes and how you think it can be improved so that they can really enjoy sports again. Because, at some level, with the increased pressure and the fact that athletes can now make money off their name, image, and likeness, it can also affect their mental performance. So I'm curious to get your thoughts there as well.
Yeah, I think you're definitely dead on with that. And there's a lot of layers that go into adding pressure to perform at an elite level. Internally, there's a lot of factors that I can tell you. I can really only speak to my experience, but when I was dancing and competing and performing, I placed a lot of pressure on myself through various different avenues, but there's also a lot of external pressures, right? And those layer up, they add up, and you'll hear coaches telling athletes like, "Oh, ignore it. You can't think about that. You got to ignore it." And I find that the more you take that route, like it's very easy to say, and it's not wrong, but the more we layer that sort of advice and tell the athlete, ignore it, put it out of your mind, the more we're sort of giving that piece more power over us, right? Um, and it's a very difficult thing to manage. I think we see in athletics, particularly collegiate athletics, as well as performing arts and other high pressure occupations, the military, obviously, high pressure business and medical fields. We see vastly elevated rates of mental illness, mental health issues, and we can sit have that conversation about why that may be, and there's a lot of different reasons why that may be. But I think one of the big key factors is just the sheer amount of mental pressure that we're under. We being people that are in those fields or those individuals, right, are under over a really sustained period of time. And so we see some people come through that and shine and do their absolute best. And some people go through that and maybe like me or some other people that I've had the pleasure of spending some time with, go through that and tend to struggle a little bit more and wind up developing some maybe negative symptoms through that, right? And trying to look at that, the work that I'm trying to do with my colleagues, and we've just started up a new private practice, Northeast Human Performance, trying to offer support to those people as they're working through those things, trying to help them develop the ways of coping with that stress and using not just trying to get rid of the stress, but utilizing it to help them achieve their highest level of performance, so that those layers of stress are not piling up and burying them and ultimately serving to pull them away from the version they want to be, right? Like, how can we actually sit within that environment, that difficult environment? Because every athlete I've ever spoken to, and performing artist and anyone else in their field, will tell you it's a very stressful environment, and they'll go off about how difficult it is, and it's been so hard and blah, blah, blah. And I always ask the same question: do you love it? Do you want to leave it? And they always tell me, no, I love it. I would never leave. I want to stay in it as long as I can, right? So how do we operate within that environment that is difficult, but we love, and find a way to achieve our highest potential and to do so in a mentally sustainable way? And so that's sort of where a lot of my work comes in, and trying to deal with it on the front end. Because, and this is not a knock at all, the NCAA has been great over the last few years, and colleges have been really awesome in the last few years at identifying that we have a lot of mental illness concerns. It's still early, so I'm going to blame that on my my difficulty pronouncing right now, right? And getting people in to help, right? We're going to have embedded counselors in athletic departments, and we're going to have social services and counseling services in the school. But we're trying to work on it a little bit more from the front end. And if we can help people really successfully navigate those difficult environments, then maybe we can minimize the negative outcomes down the road. And that's actually where a lot of my research is right now, trying to figure out exactly how we can work in that space.
Yeah, and just as a follow-up, I have another selfish but important question. Yeah, because when you look at life today and you turn on the news, and this is coming from a news guy, okay? I love reporting the news. I love reporting the news, but when you turn on the news today, the vast majority of the headlines are negative, whether it be gun violence or abortion or just pick the topic, right? So
Right.
how do you think we can better sort of manage the expectations of being responsible in terms of what is being what's going on in the world versus our own mental health, because I think it's an important balance to strike, right? Because you don't want to oversaturate yourself with the news of the day when you don't have to, but you also want to be a contributing member to society, and in order to do that, you have to know what's going on. So, how do you think we strike the balance there?
Yeah, I love that question, Kevin. And I love the sort of understanding that you're kind of sharing, and to share the balance of, like, loving to be involved with the news, but aware of the positive and potentially adverse effect that can have. I think one of the very, very first things that I do with any client that I jump in with is to talk about two things. If we need to change the outcome, right? And so in this moment, I'm talking about my outcome of, I'm dealing with a lot of stress, and because of all that stress, I'm not operating at my best, right? Name the problem, but we've been talking about stress, so let's point our finger at stress for right now, right? Um, there's two things that we can do to change what's happening because of that. We can change the environment sometimes, or we can change the way that we're operating within that environment, right? So if part of the reason that I'm feeling so stressed is because I'm spending so much time digging into these news stories that are stressing me out, I can say, all right, I'm going to limit my time engaging with those stories to X amount of minutes, hours a day, right? Um, or I'm going to make sure that for every two or three stories that I read that are stress inducing, I'm going to find a story that makes me feel good, that provides some hope to my life. I'm going to listen to a podcast from Kevin talking to some awesome person who's going to make the world a better place, right? So I'm going to balance those things. So I'm going to manipulate my environment to help me manage that pressure, to change the pressure that's coming onto me, really, right? The second thing that we can do is the way that I'm operating within my environment. So maybe I'm not able to change the way that I interact with the news. Maybe that's critical to my job. Or maybe I don't want to. Maybe I really want to be invested in those stories that are coming out, and I want to stay really up to date and well educated. Then I can just change the way that I'm interacting and operating within my environment. So I can change my coping strategies. Maybe I'm going to add in a little bit of time that I'm going to spend outside, away from my phone. Maybe I'm going to add in some more productive self-talk tools, some productive meditation tools, some productive rather than fighting with those negative concepts in my head. I'm going to work to accept them and understand that that's is, and how can I operate now knowing that world. So the particular tool that the individual is going to use, that's where we get really, really individualized and really nuanced to decide what is it that we're going to utilize, how are we going to implement it, and that really is based on where the person is at and how they are. So you could answer that question a lot better than I could in terms of what is going to be best for you. And I can help obviously facilitate that discovery with clients. But those are the two general approaches that we're going to live with. Can we change the environment and how it's operating on me? And can I change on the environment outside, and how am I interacting with that? And through both of those things, we can kind of develop that ultimate healthy balance where I can work within this environment, but I can do so in a way that's sustainable, that I can be at my best, and I can facilitate positive, strong mental health down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mitchell, I also know that you're an adjunct professor at Sacred Heart, excuse me, Sacred Heart University. So I'm curious, what level of satisfaction do you get sort of molding the minds of our future generation, and what do you hope they get out of their experience with you as young people? So how do you hope that you're helping to mold the future for our next generation?
Yeah, I really love that role. I kind of mentioned to you earlier. I'm not sure if we were recording the podcast or not at that stage. I don't remember right now. But I have a lot of different roles, but I view them all as pretty similar in terms of what I'm hoping to do. The difference is sort of the material that I'm working, right? So generally, I'm really hoping to be able to come in and sit down and work with a human being or a group of human beings and help them engage with whatever the subject matter is in a way that they develop their learning in that subject matter, but also develop their own individual skills in terms of what am I learning about myself in terms of how do I need to work? If I want to achieve a goal, what does that blueprint for me look like? How do I get to that goal? How do I treat myself along those lines when I create success and also when I encounter setbacks? Um, and how do I build in that understanding of myself and what are my strengths? What are my limitations? How do I need to operate in my environment? And can I understand and accept who I am and how I'm being in each moment? So I do that when I'm teaching psychology, whether it's general psychology, performance psychology, whatever it is. I do that when I'm teaching dance. I do that when I'm working with my performance psych clients in our mental performance space. The difference is maybe the extent of the tools that we can employ and the subject matter, really. But that's what I really love about teaching psychology is that I get the opportunity to sit down with students who are at a very stressful point in their life, but also, as most of us will look back on our college years as some of the greatest years of our lives, um, and help them sort of seek to find that balance and understand that I need to dedicate quite a bit of time and effort into achieving my academic goals, and that's going to impact the rest of my life. But how am I going to do that now with all this newfound freedom that I have as I'm in college and balance the needs, my academic needs, but also my personal needs. So I think that's my favorite part about the job.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mitchell, I'm curious to ask you about your research now because I know you've
Mm-hmm.
dabbled into mental health, elite performance, and the performing arts. You've also dabbled in doing work around eating disorders in sports. So I'm curious about what fascinates you about research and your favorite parts of what you're doing from a research perspective and what you're hoping to learn from there as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I'm working with clients, I don't actually treat mental illness, mental health things. I have some really awesome referral networks and colleagues that I work with that I'll refer out to that, right? But the reason that I found this mental performance space and performance psychology is because of my own journey as a dancer. I struggled and I shouldn't say struggled. We're still working through it, but I'm much more in control now with depression for the majority of my life, panic attacks when I was younger, and a lot of those, certainly you can never point a finger to one thing, but my experience in elite dance, highly competitive dance, and professional dance certainly fed into those things and those spaces that I allowed myself to get into. Um, and so I've always been really curious about the intersection between that elite performance environment and mental well-being, right? And I say that intentionally because we talk a lot about mental illness, but my interest is how do we change the path from here going down that path toward mental illness to where we are building the path towards mental well-being. And so that's really what's been driving my research interest. And the reason why I'm getting involved in all this research, honestly, is because the answer is right now. We don't have a lot of data, or a lot of times we don't have any data at all in those spaces. So I saw a lot of my very close friends in the dance world struggle with eating disorders. I myself have struggled with disordered eating. I've never been diagnosed with anything, although I've never sought out diagnosis either. But we can certainly see patterns of disordered eating in a lot of sports. And so when that opportunity to get involved in that research presented itself, I jumped on it. depression and anxiety is a big thing. So we're opening the door to research opportunities there. And how do we help individuals operate in their environments and help coaches shape the environments that our athletes and performing artists are working within? We can change the path to go towards mental well-being. And this is something that isn't really explored in the research at this point. That was it was less of, I really want to get into research, and more of, this is the field, this is the application, this is what I want to do and how I want to help people. But we don't know how to do it yet. And so I got into research more out of necessity because those answers don't exist. And hopefully over the next few years, we'll be able to put out some really important data that will give us an idea of how that path takes shape and what we're going to do to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Mitchell, you brought up depression and social anxiety. It's one of the reasons that, for me personally, I wanted to start this podcast because, Mitchell, I'm a huge believer in building what I call social capital and having the disability that I have. Sometimes it's harder for me to build social capital outside of the walls of my house. So it's important to me to build social capital and really build communities of support. And, it's something that I struggle with at times, my own social sort of place in the world, just because of the disability and access to opportunity. And, one of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast was I viewed it as a way of sort of knocking down barriers to social inclusion when I couldn't get out of my house. So I'm curious to ask your opinion on the importance of building social capital and really establishing a community of like-minded people in order to get support.
I think we can go beyond importance, right? I think it's an absolute necessity, right? And I applaud you for being so aware of it. And I think a podcast is a great idea for that, right? To help bring people in and say, even the name of it, right? Let's have this conversation. I think that's awesome to be able to be like, I immediately know we're going to come in and have an important conversation. And look, if we connected on LinkedIn, and in the absence of this podcast, sure, I would have accepted you, and we might have exchanged a couple of comments, and awesome, right? But now we actually get to sit down and have a sustained conversation, really get to learn and appreciate each other. I think that's a really, really awesome path to build to go about that. And also now, right, you have a published network of individuals who are working to, as you mentioned, right, when we opened up the podcast, helping to make the world a little bit better. And I think it is really important. I can speak again to my own experience because I know my experience. I don't know yours very well yet. But, I have a handful of people that I really lean on, that I know I pick up the phone and I call them all the time. And likewise, I always see my phone buzzing, and it's one of those people in my circle of support, because working in psychology is a very stressful job. As I'm sure you can imagine, I'm sitting down and sharing space with someone for an hour and sharing a lot of their burdens, and it can be very stressful, right? So it's very important to have that network of people that we can reach out to and lean on, and be there for them when they need that person to lean on as well. So I view it as an absolute necessity. It's something that I was a little bit late to the game on. I was always that person that was like, oh, I'm going to do it myself. I can just do it myself. And I still am a little bit. But seeking out ways to build that network of support, I think, is really, really important. So I love that, you've taken this really cool and creative way to building that. I think, we're in the age of Zoom now. One of the only great things that came out of COVID, that it's very, very easy for us now to click two buttons and we're engaging with someone around the world. One of the most important people in my life over the last couple of years is my mentor. who lives in Adelaide, Australia, and we would spend a couple hours a week talking to each other, right? And that's only made possible because of Zoom. So we have this really incredible tool at our fingertips, and to build out those networks, I think is critical. So I love the way that you're approaching that. That's really great.
Well, I appreciate that, and you know, I'm also curious to ask you about looking from a more broader perspective. How do you think
Mm-hmm.
mental health and the conversation around that can be better supported with resources and supported sort of outlets for people? How do you think the mental health gap can be shrink? Because when you look at mental
Mm-hmm.
health today, there are been increased investments in it, but in certain areas, there's been a sort of a lack of understanding of the need for increased resources. So when you look at mental health today, how do you think it can be a better supported sort of medium to help more people?
Yes, I think that's really critical. So I first will say there's two things. Well, there's a few things. There's two things on my first point. One is that there's been a huge amount of work put into making resources for treating and offering help to mental illness, people struggling with mental health issues, more available, which is amazing. And those resources are out there. We're talking about it more, and I think a lot of people are able to now see that I don't need to be in a late stage of depression or an anxiety disorder to understand that I might need a little bit of help, right? That those resources are something that really we all should be taking advantage of, and it's been really helpful. It's been amazing for me to take advantage of when I've been in very difficult places, but also when things have been okay, and just been able to check in with someone. I think that's really, really important, and those resources are much more available now. But I also do talk to a lot of people who are in need of them and have a hard time getting access to them. So it's a different balance there to be able to say that the resources are so much more available, and yet people have a hard time getting to them when they need them. Um, Maybe that speaks to the fact that we need even more. But where I think, and again, this is maybe biased a little bit by the space and the work that I do. Really, I think we need to spend more time and effort addressing things on the front end. Kind of what I was talking about. Can we those sound mental skills that are going to help us operate in difficult environments, pressure situations, long-term pressure of a few weeks or a few months, when that stress is going to skyrocket and we're going to have a hard time coping with it. Can I work with someone prior to that or during that to help me build those skills to help prevent the downfall down the line, right? And so if we can address those things at the front end, and right now I'm looking at that in performing arts and sports, really, but that should be something that's applicable throughout life, right? We know in performing arts and sports, our performers, our athletes are at a much higher risk of developing mental illness than the average person. So knowing that that's a high risk place, let's make those resources available to them from day one before they get into that environment, and let them engage with those resources on a day-to-day, week, so that we can hopefully build their resilience, build their ability to operate within that environment. And so those are the resources we're trying to provide through Northeastern Performance. And that's what my research is really trying to say. What's the best way to do that? And is that going to be effective? We're confident it is, but we don't have research to back that right now. So that, I think, is going to be our next wave. It might be years off at this point. But that's the wave that myself and all my colleagues are working towards. And if we can do that, then I think we're going to be able to get people in a much better mind frame, in a much better place throughout, like from the get-go, and also throughout their lives. Maybe it's idealistic, but I think we'll get there.
Slow and steady wins the race, right?
This is it. This is it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mitchell, I have another selfish question to ask you because I'm just fascinated to get your perspective as a retired dancer. I'm curious how you view the profession now, particularly for younger children and not and even older professionals as well. Because I asked you earlier about athletes and dealing
Mm.
with mental performance, but I think it can also be applied to dancing. So tell me about how you view the space today from a mental perspective in terms of the pressure to perform. And you're also in a unique place to answer this question because you own a dance studio with your wife. So I'm
Mm.
curious, when you look at the state of the profession today, what comes to mind, good, bad, and indifferent?
Yeah. I think I think dance and performing arts in a lot of ways is trying to make a lot of improvement in terms of the way that people are treated, the way that we interact with people, both youth and professional. And in a lot of spaces and in a lot of companies, I'm seeing really awesome growth. Um, it's difficult to generalize because it's such a vast field. Um, and so I can really only speak to the companies that I've been in and the schools that I've worked with. I do see a very strong. I think something that's sort of in line with where we're at, where people want to open the door to those conversations. The difficulty, I think, is in implementation, where we see people who have been in the field for so long, looking at specifically at competitive dance. And I should preface, I don't know every single um, uh, competitive space for every style of dance, right? But people who have been in spaces for a very long time, doing things in a certain way, and have created outcome results, it's very easy to measure success in terms of the outcome, where it's more difficult to measure success in terms of are we able to create the outcome, winning a major championship or creating incredible performance, with also including the mental impact on the individual, right? And that's difficult because it's much more silent in a lot of spaces unless we're intentionally reaching out and trying to figure out what that impact is, right? And it changes day to day. So what I'm working with a lot of the dance companies that I work with is trying to build out ways to understand that mental and physiological impact that we're having on individuals and build those into our understanding of success so that we can build things. I can speak to my own experience again, being driven to achieve in a competition, set the groundwork for sort of dangerous mental practices where I would beat myself up and say really terrible things about myself to try to motivate myself. And that was coming after a lot of different angles as well. Until all of a sudden, those things did push me to work harder, but also led to contributing to a lot of beliefs about myself on to and still am holding on to at this moment, right? So it's a very difficult balance. I think we're moving forward. I think there's a lot of work still to do in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm. And to that point, I've got two questions left for you. And the first has to
Please.
do with uh, personal development versus personal growth, and whether you think the two are interconnected.
Yeah, can you clarify what do you mean by each of those?
In terms of developing as people, in terms of uh, evaluating whether you think you've made growth from a personal perspective. How do you think we can evaluate whether we've made personal growth as individuals from
Mm.
a mental health perspective?
Okay. Yeah, I think, so one of the first things that I do with new clients as well, this may not be the very first thing, but it's usually in the first few sessions, is we spend the first one or two really, we spend a lot of time trying to build awareness of the thoughts that I have about myself. A lot of times you might ask someone, what do you think of yourself? I don't know. I guess I'm okay, right? What do you say to yourself when you're completing tasks? I don't really say anything, but there is a lot of cognitive function in that space. Um, and so when I can become more aware of what I'm saying to myself, believing about myself, thinking about myself, just sort of in tune with that tells us a lot about where we are. Um, I catch myself all the time, when I make a mistake, falling back into those patterns that I had for my whole life that served to help me to achieve incredible things in the dance space and dance professionally for nearly 15 years and to, get elite placements and world championship competitions and all that. But if you're going to try to operate through the rest of your life with being your own worst critic and being that person who's in the back of your mind saying you're not good enough, it's going to be very, very difficult, A, to create success, sustain success, but B, to just be able to be comfortable with who you are, right? So I think a really easy way, I shouldn't say an easy way, a really good way to sort of monitor that growth is to just check in with yourself every day. Whether it's a time where I'm going to take 10 minutes to just sort of sit and think and have a conversation with myself. Journaling is a really great way to do it. So I'm just going to take a half hour, 20 minutes, 15 minutes even, and just write, free write. And I can use that to kind of check in and see where am I at right now. We have some self-report measures that I use with clients that can be really helpful to kind of check in and say, like, how am I feeling today? Boom, boom, boom. And we can measure those numbers. They're easier to measure. They don't give us as much information. But I really like writing or taking the time to just clear your mind and be with yourself for a little bit to be able to kind of engage with, well, I was more stressed out than I knew I was. Or, I find when I'm writing, when I do journaling activities, all of a sudden I blow up and I've got 3-4 pages and I'm like, wow, I didn't really realize I was feeling that. Right. And when you're able to have that understanding and that lens into yourself, it becomes a lot easier to understand why am I motivated to do the things that I'm doing and how do I move forward in a way that really aligns with what I care about and what I value. So I think it's really, really important to give yourself the space to sort of dig into those things on your own. It's been very enlightening for me over the past years. And I definitely encourage all my clients to do that. I think it's really important.
Yeah, Mitchell, there's a sign in my office that said that everyone's portrait of success is different, and we're all on different timetables, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. And Mitchell, my final question for you has to do with resilience and how you view the term of resilience as it relates to your own personal and professional legacy and how you want that to be defined.
Yeah, so we definitely have to talk about resilience quite a bit in our space. I tend to not always make that the focal point of conversations. I think we can build resilience in a lot of different ways, and I think that a lot of times, if I have sort of my own. We all of us in our field, we have our own like theories of how we operate as human beings and how we address each of those critical components, resilience among them. I think a lot of times when I'm working with an athlete or a performer or just just a human being, right? When I can create the space to sort of connect with them and help them connect with themselves, help them understand themselves, and help them sort of build the path, like see the path that they want to go through, and be where they are in the moment along that path, and sort of be okay with that and be good with that, and define their journey. Resilience tends to happen where I can say, yeah, I'm good with this, right? Like I am, I'll just use a client that I was working with the other day as an example, who is, I'll change the sport, right? We'll just say she's a softball player, and working to become a starter on her team, right? And when she had that stress of, I'm not a starter and I think I should be and I want to be, that's when resilience was very low, because she was really beating herself up over where she was and really angry and stressed out over where she was versus where she wanted to be, right? Versus when she was able to kind of take a step back and say, this is only my first year in this program. And she's at an elite Division I program, right? That the other people on this team have been working their butts off for 3 years to get the positions that they're in. They're a few years ahead of me. So to be able to say, it's okay that I'm not a starter right now. This is my role, and I'm going to accept my role on the team and find a way to make a positive impact on the team and be good with that, knowing that in this process, I'm going to continue getting myself better, making myself better, and eventually I'll have that shot. But when I'm able to be sort of at peace with that, it's much easier to be resilient, to be able to say, those setbacks that come, it's okay. I can handle that. That's part of where I'm at right now. And I'm going to use this as fuel for my growth. Right. And so that's sort of the approach that I take to building that resilience, in a little bit of a less pressure fueled way. That's, again, general, right? There are certainly times when a client's going to come in and we got to light the fire. Right. And maybe that might be a little bit of a different approach. And we might take a little bit more of a directive approach. But I think, to address the second piece of that question, how do I want my legacy to be? I feel like I'm still, in my mind, I want to believe I'm still a little bit young to be about the word legacy, but it is important to kind of have that defined so that I'm working towards it, right? I really want to be that person that's there to support. When someone's having a hard time, I know Mitch is going to be there for me. I know Mitch is going to be the person I can reach out to and is going to listen and is going to help provide the guidance and is going to be able to help me realize where I need to be and be at peace with where I am. Peace, but also knowing that I can work through and continue to get better, right? So I can, I use the word acceptance a lot in my work. And sometimes it's criticized because, if you are, how can you move forward? Right. And I hear that. But I think there's a big difference between acceptance on my professional journey or personal journey, acceptance with where I'm at versus complacency, right? And so if that my timeline is not over and I'm at this stage on my timeline and I'm going to continue to push forward, and day to day, I'm still hungry. I'm going to hit the ground running, right? But I know where I'm at right now, then I think that feeds into both building the resilience to be able to go and take on those tough obstacles, touching on something else that we talked about, knowing that something that could happen and something that I'm going to work through if and when it comes up. But also knowing that I'm giving myself my opportunity. I'm going to take advantage of every opportunity that I get while I'm here, and that's going to help me get to the next stage. And I think hopefully that's really what I'm building towards in my legacy. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a work in progress, but it's important
for sure
to give your what I call giving yourself grace with urgency, right?
That's a very, very, very good way to kind of supplement what I was just talking about. Yes, thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, I'll allow you to steal that. Just give me 10% of your commission check, okay? You can keep the rest.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah, Mitch, as someone who wants to get connected with you, buddy, finally tell me what's the best way they can do that.
Yes, I appreciate it. I'm on LinkedIn. That's easy. That's how we got connected. Um, Mitchell DeSimone. But you can find me just through, it's probably easier. It's northeasthumanperformance.com. Or you can just shoot me an email directly. It's Mitch, MITCH, at Northeast Human Performance.
Fantastic. Well, Mitch, I was fired up when you agreed to do this, buddy, and you didn't disappoint. And I really enjoyed the diversity and depth of our conversation about psychology and sports life. And dads, my friend, your work in the space and time on my behalf this morning is most appreciated. And I want to thank you for being here today.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Kevin, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and connect with you. It's been really awesome. I keep doing the amazing things that you're doing, and I hope opportunity to connect again pretty soon.